Good morning, and welcome to the last section that we're going to be talking about. So far, we've learned about how to solve one-step equations, but the one thing that we didn't talk about when doing that is what if the equation would result in a negative answer or deals with negative numbers. And so the one thing that we want to make sure that we remind is about the inverse addition rule. Remember that the sum of a number and its inverse is 0. So 3 plus a negative 3 is 0. A plus negative a is equals 0. A negative 6 plus 6 is 0. Okay, so that's the inverse addition rule, is that if you are adding its opposite or its inverse, then you're going to get 0. That's why when we are doing the that's why when we're doing subtraction equations, you're adding the opposite of whatever it is. Okay, so I just wanted to remind you about the inverse addition rule. And that's how you're going to that's how you're going to solve for these variables in one step, is by using the inverse addition rule. Okay, so when looking at number 1, using the inverse addition rule, you first identify the side that has the variable. Okay, and then you're going to add the inverse to both sides. Remember, both sides. You got to balance the equation. Remember, I'm a little teapot. Okay, so you add 3 to both sides, so that this cancels out and becomes 0. So you're left with just y. Okay, equal to negative 5 plus 3. Now, remember back to the previous unit. How do you add negative 5 plus 3? Well, you can do it a couple of different ways. You can start at negative 5, and since you're adding a positive, go right on the number line. Or you can think of it as a subtraction problem. 5 minus 3 is 2. Since 5 is bigger than 3 and was negative, then it's a negative 2. Okay? Looking at number 2, same thing. Identify the side with the variable. You are then going to add or subtract by the opposite. So we're going to subtract 3 from both sides. And so this cancels out. You're left with n equal to negative 10 minus 3. All right? Remember that anytime you're subtracting a positive number, okay, 3 is what you're subtracting, that you go to the left on the number line. So negative 10 minus 3 is the same as negative 10 plus negative 3, so therefore it's negative 13. Then looking at number 3, you've got identify the side with the variable. All right, so we have, then you multiply both sides by the inverse, so or multiply both sides by the same number. Remember that the inverse rule is really just the inverse addition rule is really just referring back to addition and subtraction. You still want to go by the one-step rule that we did before on this, which is you want to look at what is being done. Division is what's being done. You want to do the inverse of that, or the opposite of that, which is multiply by negative 3. Negative 3 times negative 3 is just 1. You've got to multiply by negative 3 on the other side, so you're left with a is equal to 9 times 3, which is 27. Positive times a negative is a negative, so negative 27 should be your answer. Okay? So remember that you're doing the opposite of division, which is multiplication. You don't want to multiply by a positive 3. It's not the opposite of negative 3. All right? It's just the opposite of division here. Up here, you do the inverse. So you do the opposite. Okay? Looking at number 4, you've got this side with the variable. remember that even though there's no multiplication between there, that's 6 times x, so you've got to divide by 6 on both sides. So that cancels out and you're left with x is equal to 12 divided by 6 is 2, then add your 0, so 20. Negative divided by a positive is a negative, so x is equal to negative 20. So it's the same as before, so you're still doing the same exact thing that you did in the other one-step equations. The only difference is now you're adding in positive and negative numbers or integers within that. So you got to remember your rules from the previous unit, which is when you're adding a positive, you go to the right on the number line. Adding a negative, you go left. When you're subtracting a positive, you go left. When you're subtracting a negative, you go right on the number line. Okay. Other than that, the other rules of multiplying positive and negative numbers, 2 negatives make a positive, opposites make a negative. Same way with division. 2 negatives make a positive, opposites make a negative. Okay? So just remember your rules on adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing negative numbers, and then follow your rules of one-step equations and you'll be okay. All right? Work on the practice problems, and then we'll talk about them tomorrow.